Welcome back, Cincinnati Soccer Talk fans and fans of FC Cincinnati. This is episode 411 of Cincinnati Soccer Talk, and with us coming off a match against Atlanta United, with both teams missing a significant amount of players. This game was always going to be a bit of a toss-up in my mind. And Cincinnati comes out with the 2-2 draw. The emotions were high on one side, really low to start, high to get it back with Evander getting a brace, and then an own goal from Alvis Powell put the game at a 2-2 draw. Wow, you guys are throwing me off there with the video. Thanks for those that are we'll talk about that later. We're going to welcome in our cast because all I see on my screen is me, and I believe there's three other guys here with me tonight. Sorry, Coach. I'm going to welcome them in. Coach, we're going to start with you because I think you were the one playing with some video there for me. Thank you for that.
I was. You work so hard on these intros. You're hosting. You're the host with the most, and I just want to highlight you as you present us. Plus, I want to hide from the camera sometimes. So glad to be here.
No, I totally think that's a great idea. I just wasn't ready for it. It threw me off there. So So those of you who are listening later in the week, make sure you catch our live show because you missed some of the action if you miss the live. Coach, good to have you here. Nick, welcome back to the show, man.
Yeah, happy to be here. What you guys didn't see when Coach went off camera is every time that happens, he just takes a swig of Crown Royal. So if you ever see a close up on any one of us, just know that's what's happening behind the scenes.
I love it.
There you go.
I love it. And Nick, we've got a game against Nashville coming up this next week, which we'll talk about later in the season, or later in the show. See, I'm still rattled from that. And
we
Nick,
played them twice.
Yeah. You hail from Nashville, not recently. Were you a Nashville SC guy when you lived there?
I was not. They actually were not a thing when I moved away. So Titans and Preds were kind of the go-to there. I'll also shout out the old Nashville Metros from the old A-League, some early games against the likes of Montreal Impact and Seattle Sounders before they moved up to MLS. So
Impact. Wow.
Plenty of good soccer heritage in the Music City, but no, I did not get the honor of watching Nashville SC when I lived there.
Okay, well then we'll let you stick around on the show tonight, just because of that. So glad to have you, Cliff. Welcome back. This is I think number 3 in a row for you. Is that right?
It is 3. I begged you to make it not 3, but you chose otherwise. So I'm the Cliff. I got the shirt. I was at the game. Coach, I think I saw you at the game. Also, were you at the game?
I was, yeah.
I think I actually have a photo of you crossing a street I was in my car and I saw you crossing the street. How many children do you have, Coach?
I had a gaggle
like a parade. I was like, am I going to make this light, or is Coach going to get his kids across the street?
That was me. They were not all my kids. I was taking kids and friends. So, had to have that mid-afternoon game. It's the prime time to take family. Unless, of course, you're sitting anywhere near, was it Jason Ashcraft was getting on the case in the chat of families walking. I can say, in that game that I allegedly went to, I spent much of it on the concourse, running kids to the bathroom, concession stands. So I get what he's saying. But, soccer's for everybody. So suck it up.
Cliff, when you first said, hey, did I see Coach? I thought you were going to make a Brad Guzan joke there for a second. Hey, as a fellow bald white guy,
hello.
There's no shame in that.
Shine bright like a Guzman.
Yeah. So Cliff, let me get this right. Cliff he snapped a photo of Coach. Coach snapped a photo of what looked like Lucho Acosta. Is that what I'm remembering?
I did see. My heart jumped in my throat. I saw a small dude that looked just like Lucho for a hot second. So much so that I snapped a picture and sent it to the CST chat because I thought it was uncanny. Obviously, as I got a little closer, I was like, it's not him, but it was close enough.
I had to zoom in. I had to zoom in on the photo to make sure it wasn't really him. Like, what is he doing there?
He wants to be back, Brian. He wants Skyline again and La Roses and all those good things.
Great stuff. Cliff, I think you posted something on Facebook today, I believe, about some tickets and
so I'm a season ticket holder, and I was offering to my friends who can name the band that I was in with my wife. My wife is coming back from Peru tomorrow after having been in Peru for 2 months. So I don't know my name. I'm distracting myself with this broadcast right now. So I'm extremely anxious. And if people can name the band that I was in Cincinnati, it was a salsa band. If they can put that in the chat, then they get a seat next to me. When my wife doesn't want to go because it's too cold, which is quite often because she's South American. It's not 85 and above. She doesn't really come out of the house. So you can imagine that opens up a lot of opportunity. But yeah, I'm always looking for new people to sit with me in one of my 3 pinky out season tickets. Now, I will say I sit opposite the Bailey, like polar opposite the Bailey in section 228. You can come and accost me.
Perfect view of the TIFO when they have one there.
Oh, it's
right?
amazing. It's amazing. Yes. And perfect view of when Alvis Powell puts in an own goal. It's like absolutely the best view for that. So get there.
Yeah, let's hope that doesn't happen again.
God
well, guys,
let's
I want to thank our sponsor, Apollo Home. FCC is heating up, and so is the beautiful springtime weather. Apollo Home is here to help you CSCers keep cool with a $29 cooling tune-up. Make sure your AC is running at peak performance before the heat really kicks in. Schedule your tune-up today with Cincinnati's trusted home service experts. Call Apollo Home or book online at apollohome.com and stay cool all season long. Gentlemen, we've alluded to it already. The Atlanta matchup this last week was a roller coaster of emotions for those of us watching, maybe those on the pitch as well, as we saw Atlanta go up 1-0. Evander with a screamer off the head of a defender on the wall to tie it up. Evander with a brace to go ahead. And then that own goal that we just mentioned, ending the game at a 2-2 draw. Again, we mentioned in the intro before I was highly distracted there that both teams were missing a slew of players, and we just weren't sure. Like, we knew who we were missing due to, injury, international call-ups, suspensions. Atlanta had, I think, 3 more players missing than we did, and so they were a little thin as well. So we roll out a back line that is not playing in their normal positions. We'll talk about that as we go. Hagglund gets his first start, first time back, and he anchors that 5 back from the central position. We'll talk about Hagglund here a little bit. I want to get into our best and worst. So if you're listening, if you're watching live here, go ahead and put your best and worst in the chat. I've seen some already. Coach, I'm going to start with you, your best and worst of the week.
Yeah, I think my best is going to be a little more off the field than on the field, because that game was a little bit hard to stomach, even with the improvement in the second half. My best is, I think, the team culture that's starting to either form or at least come back with Hagglund coming back into the fold and things, with Evander being there instead of another different diminutive number 10 who may or may not have been drinking beer on the concourse at TQL during that game. Nick Hagglund, I think it's been pretty well publicized after the game, was seen with his arm around Alvis Powell for quite a while. And I think he said afterward, he was just saying, look, you've made thousands of good plays for us. And they might remember this one for this game, but you have 1,000 more good plays in you. So keep your head up. And, that's solid leadership from a guy that we know is a great leader of the team. And then that even trickles down. Like I mentioned, Evander, he, after the game, was not saying, yeah, I got a brace. I got my first 2 goals at TQL, but he was saying that first goal was luck. Like, I'm glad to have it, but it was lucky. Right. And then, and he said in the second goal, it's fine. I'm glad to score, but if the team's not winning, like, it's not good enough, and I need to do better. And he took some responsibility for that. On the other side of those things, though, my worst is going to be one Luca Orishano. And here is why. 'Cause he didn't have a good game, but that's not why he's my worst. When you have players missing, like a Kevin Denke, or on the other side, they were missing Miguel Almiron. Well, their speedy winger, who is about worth $5 million, Saba Lobjanidze, try that. Saba and Orishano are similar type players. They love to dribble. They stay wide. They come inside. One of those players created for their team in the absence of a DP, and the other one, Luca Orishano, was just not good. He only had 1 key pass, no accurate crosses in 3 attempts. He only completed 3 of his 7 dribbles, and ultimately, turned the ball over on 32% of his touches, which is fine if you're being dangerous and you're turning the ball over because you're putting balls into the box and things, but he wasn't doing that. He was just having them taken away from him. He only won 4 of his 11 ground duels. Just an overall bad performance from a guy who needed to step up when you have a guy like Kevin Denke missing.
And it was his birthday.
Yeah.
It was his birthday. He had too much cake. He had too much cake before the game. Let's give the guy a break. It was his birthday. All right. I want to talk about Orishano's performance a little bit later because I do think there's something there that we can hit on. Nick, let's go your best and worst.
Yeah, I echo what Coach said about Evander. I thought this was maybe one of the best games we've seen him play. And I know we're about to dive into, what worked for him in this game coming up in a little bit. But I want to shout out who I think has been the most improved player this season, and that's Pavel Buka. He continues to impress me game in, game out. And you saw him sort of control that midfield. He's playing more of the role that we kind of always thought maybe Obi would play a little bit. I hate that shot right there with my face front and center. Thank you.
You're beautiful, brother.
So that's my worst right there. But no,
that's our worst too, Nick.
I think you really saw him be aggressive. Coach, you just mentioned, Luca Orejano not really being aggressive in creating plays in Denke's absence up top. You kind of saw Pavel Buka fill that void. He was very aggressive in dribbling out from the midfield, very aggressive in trying to make that first outlet pass. And he's had a couple of iffy games over the last little bit, but I really like the way he played in this game. For my worst, timing and communication to me still feel a little bit off. You're seeing it a lot in the passes. They'll make a great play, great dribble. They'll take it all the way down into the box, into the attacking area, try to make a key pass into the box. It's, a step behind the striker cutting in. You'll see it a lot where there's just a little bit extra mustard on a pass and, the other receiving player can't control it. It bounces off, goes away. And I do think you saw 2 minor communication issues on both of those Atlanta goals. A lot of players switching, a lot of people that maybe weren't sure what area of the field they were supposed to be defending, what their assignments were. And that led to 2 Atlanta goals. One of them kind of scored by us. So there's the Alvis Powell Galazzo we all thought we were getting at some point this season. But that to me continues to be the biggest issue with this team. It's something that's going to get cleaned up, but it is costing us points as of now.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. We'll talk about that later in the show too, about how the team is gelling or not gelling as the season goes on. But I want to move along. Cliff, let's go to you for your best and worst.
I mean, it was just so nice to get there and sit down with my kid and my friend. We were sitting in 228 opposite and just see Hagglund start. I mean, as a guy who has been to Beyond Exercise and had his leg dry needled, I can tell you injuries like the one that Nick Hagglund has suffered again and again. And I go back with Nick Hagglund to Nippert days. I saw him get helicoptered as a CB against Crystal Palace. It was just great to see him start. And I really, after that moment, I really didn't care what happened, although I predicted the right score. And as a result, I'm a little higher on the Growler Cup. So y'all just can continue to chase me. But looking at my worst is like, let's not look at the dagger play. Right. Let's not look at I really have an issue looking at Powell's own goal and not instead looking at, as coach and even Nick alluded to, is the inability to score. You've got those weapons up front. And what I found was interesting was that if you're a fan of the deflection that caused the Evander goal to go in, then you must accept when things like the Powell own goal happens. It is that kind of game, folks. And so I really I plead with folks to understand the game, understand that those things happen. And Alvis Powell is a family guy, and he's been with us since Nippert. I remember when he was number 45, and I really appreciate his effort. So let's not look at that dagger play. Let's take this conversation and look at the inability to score and other things that contributed to the 2-2 draw which I predicted.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you predict that score? Is that what I heard?
Well, last Monday we were on this and I said 0-2 loss. And then Ken Hecker looked like I just shot his puppy. He went, oh, and I was like, well, maybe that's really too harsh. So I thought maybe we'll put a couple goals together. And so I predicted a 2-2 draw. I did.
And we put those goals together as my best because of Evander and his urgency. I think it was just last week I talked about his lack of urgency on the field. It just looks that he's getting the ball, playing it safe. He'll beat a guy or two, but he doesn't really accelerate when he beats a guy. He'll beat a guy and just kind of stand there and look for the next easy pass or the oncoming runner or whatever. He played, we'll talk maybe a little bit about first half, second half. The second half he played with so much more urgency, I felt, and more confidence maybe. And I think that's a guy that's working into a new team, new players around him with other new players that are also working into a new team as well. So he was my best. Just watching his second half performance was exciting to me to see what could be in the future. My worst, and we've alluded to it already, is we have 11 players on the field, right? And 5 of them were playing out of position, out of their natural position. And those 5 were playing in the same back line together. And so we talk about some of the communication issues. We talk about Nick Hagglund back for his first match, and he's anchoring that back line. So this isn't a guy that's been on the field with any of these players yet this season. And he's the guy calling the shots in the center of that defense. It shows me 2 things. One, we didn't have anybody else that Pat Noonan trusted to do that, but Nick Hagglund is a guy that Pat Noonan can trust to be that leader in the back, even with his first game back. So good to see him back. Wish we could have had him in a more natural position, although I do think he played well in this first match. So in a few minutes, guys, we are going to have Tony Husband from MLS Season Pass join us tonight for an interview to talk about what he's seeing across the Eastern Conference, what he's seeing in FC Cincinnati, and what he's seeing in Nashville, since that's where he has hailed from and called some of their matches. So we'll welcome him on in just a moment. Let's talk about Nick Hagglund's performance for just a moment, because it was his first game back, and thought he did a pretty decent job holding that back line together, the patchwork back line. Nick, what'd you think of Nick Hagglund's performance?
Yeah, in the context of how he started the game to begin with, I think he does deserve some flowers for the way he played. I think the thing that stands out about Nick Hagglund in that game was really strong positioning. I saw that starting lineup, and then I saw Latte Loth in the lineup for Atlanta. I'm like, oh, this is about to be a disaster. But I thought Nick really did hold his own. I thought the way he was able to take away some of that space, really keep Atlanta from kind of pushing the issue too much. And I thought the other big area that you really saw him excel in is something that we've talked about on the show before, and that's on the set pieces. Really, really good chance off a corner kick. In the first half, a little glancing header that he was able to get above the defense. Brad Guzan just stopped it. But that's something that Nick Hagglund's been really good at, is being that guy to kind of take away space and be a target man in the box. And you saw him do a little bit of that. Still a couple of hiccups in terms of ball handling, which seems to be par for the course for the Nick Hagglund experience. But overall, I think he played a really, really solid game. And, you have to be happy with how he played in the context of how he got into the lineup to begin with.
Yeah, and I don't remember the sprint contest he got into with which player in Atlanta, but he got into a sprint contest to the back left, and I can tell you everybody in my section was like, "Oh, is the ankle going to hold up?" we all just contracted, but I was so proud of him chasing down that player into the back left. And if somebody,
it was Latte Lot both times. And what was great about it is the first time he had a step on him and he used his body and tackled the ball out of bounds. I don't even think it actually went out of bounds. And then the second time he realized quickly he wasn't going to win that sprint. And then instead of trying to do it anyway, like we've seen a lot of players do, he recovered to the middle and basically said, you're going to have to find an opponent or try to pass it, because I'm not going to stay out there near you where you can just cook me now that I'm already tired.
And I mean, that kind of
leadership
experience
playing
on the field is I got to say, is like that is the kind of thing that I think younger players need to see and be around when Nick's on. And so it was great to see. I appreciate those notes, Coach.
Nick is such a smart player. He knows his strengths, he knows his weaknesses. I did kind of gasp because if I remember correctly, that's about the same part of the field that he went down and broke that ankle to begin with last year. And so seeing him in that same spot and that same play, just thought, but to see him come up, recovering and he taking the player out, taking the player off the ball, was good to see. So, gentlemen, we're going to push pause on this part of the conversation. We're going to come back to this. We want to welcome in Tony Husband from MLS Season Pass. Let me get him up here on the screen. Tony, welcome to Cincinnati Soccer Talk, man. How are you doing tonight?
Good evening, everyone. Really nice to be back with you and listening to your thoughts on the weekend's game and International Week Soccer in MLS, which always leads to a few different teams. And then I think we've got a really interesting game to look forward to this weekend.
No doubt. And so, Tony, you've been around for quite a while calling games in Premier League here in the MLS. You called games for Nashville SC for a couple years back. So you're very familiar with the team, at least their history, the team that we'll be playing. So I want to talk about that a little bit later in this interview. But I just want to start with this question. Like it's obviously early in the season, right? We're 5 matches into the season, and from your perspective, the matches that you've seen, the games you've called, the research you've done, what teams have surprised you the most so far? Whether that's they're overperforming better than you thought or underperforming from what we expected, from what we saw in the preseason and the moves that they've made.
I think the first one I would say would be Vancouver. I think after the change at the end of last season with Vanni Sartini going, and with all the kind of things going on around the club, for sale, possibly, are they going to have to find a new stadium in Vancouver? May the club even leave the city and move somewhere else? So to see them come out of the gate and actually, have an undefeated start was fantastic. And to be fair to them, I feel like they need a little asterisk next to their record because, what the team they put out on Saturday that lost that 100% start to the season was not really the team that had got such a good start to the season. And so I think they've been excellent. And actually, I said this a couple of weeks ago to a St. Louis podcast when they said, who's you enjoying watching? And I said, I think Vancouver are one of the most watchable teams in this league at the moment. I think you've got to add San Diego in there. We all know about the challenge of expansion and what that can be like. And, to come in and to start the way they have finally beaten at the weekend, it's been a really good start for them. I'll see them in the next few weeks. I'm looking forward to that as well. And I think St. Louis have looked pretty solid as well with Olaf Melberg coming in there. A seasoned defender who I used to watch as a player in England with Aston Villa. And no surprise in some ways that he's made them pretty solid. And the question is going to be, can they get the goals at the other end of the field? But I think St. Louis have made a pretty steady start as well after a bit of a rocky second year. So that's very much based on kind of what I've seen in the flesh so far. But I'd put Vancouver right up there at the top right now.
Tony, you mentioned a bunch of Western Conference teams there, and I agree with you, especially with Vancouver. The East has been interesting because I don't think a lot of people had the teams in this order on their big board. We have Philadelphia, Charlotte, and then Miami, of course, but Nashville all sitting atop the Eastern Conference. Are these the teams that you expect to be in the hunt for those top 4 seed, the home playoff games? Or is this maybe a flash in the pan, just teams that kind of jumped out to a hot start, in your opinion?
Well, we are early. You're absolutely right. And, look at it from the Cincinnati point of view, this will be a 10th game of the season coming up this weekend. But of course, you've had CONCACAF games. And I really feel CONCACAF can have a seriously challenging effect on any MLS team that plays in the competition because of when it comes. It's so early in the campaign. Teams are still finding their feet, and in some cases are playing competitive CONCACAF games before they're even playing an MLS game. And that is a really, really tough challenge. And it's no surprise historically MLS teams struggle in the competition. So, Miami, I think, are always going to be up there. They have some priorities, though, this year that, with the Club World Cup to come as well. I tipped Atlanta to top the East. I just felt the money they'd spent, the quality they brought in, and the fact that they don't have these other competitions as a distraction. I think really for me cemented them in my mind as a top team. And both teams in Ohio, I had in my top 6. So and I fully expect them, to be in and around there come the end of the season. Nashville, who I'm sure we'll talk more about, 3 wins in a row for them. After a kind of slow start, hanging over from last season where they had a pretty wretched year really, but they signed some good players, so quality shows.
Yeah. Tony, I was going to ask you, you touched on it just a little bit. I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper because I don't know if you're very familiar with the fan base in Cincinnati, but Cincinnati is very split right now over the squad that's out on the pitch. And some are ready to throw in the towel. Like, this team is not performing the way that we expected them to perform with the money that they spent on these players, on Denke and Evander, and they're not putting the goals in. And so half the fan base is ready to just throw the season away. The other half of the fan base is a little bit more patient and understanding that it's going to take some time for these new players and a new squad to gel, to find the chemistry, to find the partnerships on the field, to really develop into the team that they can be. I'm curious, from your perspective, what's your assessment of Cincinnati currently? I know we've talked about they've had a lot of games in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Is this a team that is still gelling, that from your perspective that you can see, and do you see good things out of them?
I think quality will always, rise a team nearer the top than the bottom. I definitely would not be throwing anything out right now. Evander is perhaps let's leave Messi to one side. And if we say in a league minus Messi, Evander is perhaps the best kind of mercurial individual talent in this league right now in what he can do on the field. He's a wonderful player, and Cincinnati have got him. Which is, it's a pretty good trade-off when you consider, okay, it was a shame to lose a Costa in many ways, but if you lose a player who doesn't want to be there anyway, and you can bring in a player like Evander, that for me is great. Denke has got a big price tag, so obviously you're going to want to see results from that. But we've seen some so far. He is going to need more time, but keeping Oroshano and getting that situation sorted out, I think was good. Kubo is still, to me, a good player in this league. You've got Miaz going to come back from injury at some point. There is maybe a question mark over some depth in certain places. I know I've read about, what do you do if you haven't got, say, Buka available? Brian Anunga is a steady Eddie in Major League Soccer, but he's not maybe a week in, week out player. But no, I think this Cincinnati team should be very competitive. I would expect them to be, up there and in and around the business end of the Eastern Conference come the end of the season, and then it's playoffs. And to be honest with you, it's about getting that right, that hot streak at the end of the campaign. These games, all the games matter, but ultimately it's getting results when perhaps you're not quite as crisp as you want to be. And I listened to what Pat Noonan said after the game on Saturday, and he wasn't pleased with much of the quality, particularly in the first half. So right now, it's dig out the results. It's been a tough start to the season with a lot of games, played a lot more games than some of the opposition that you're facing. And then you want to hit form later in the season, but you've got to get results in the meantime. I think Cincinnati have got the tools to be able to do that.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah, Tony, Nashville native here. Shout out to family back in Franklin, Tennessee. I want to talk about Nashville SC for a minute because obviously you know the team very well. You call games for them for several seasons. You still call a lot of games now for Apple TV. You mentioned a lot of fans weren't happy with how last season turned out for Nashville SC, but they've got a good run going this year, a couple of multi-goal wins under their belt. In your opinion, when you watch this team, the last couple of games, is this a hot streak, or is this more of a sign of what this team is turning into and what they can become for the rest of the year?
That's a really good question. And by the way, lovely to hear you have the family down in Franklin. I was only in Franklin earlier today. One of the best places in the South for me.
Absolutely.
It's a good question. Definitely it's a streak, and we all know what this league is like when it comes to streaks. Nashville actually won 4 in a row back in 2023. You have to go back to the summer of 2022, I think, to when they won 4 in a row before that. So this is a team that historically, you hit that 3 or 4 wins, and then there's usually a draw or a defeat in there somewhere. They've looked good the last 2 home games. They played well against Portland, went to Philadelphia, who've been a bogey team really for Nashville most of the time that they've been in MLS. They've not fared very well against them, and they got a really resounding victory that day at Subaru Park. And then they came back at home and they beat a Montreal side that was pretty poor. And ultimately, I think we got an idea of the turmoil that they're in when we saw that Laurent Courtois was dismissed today. So, but this is a team that's invested in some quality as well. I think, you think Nashville, and I think from the outside, you think, well, it's Mukhtar, it's Zimmerman, it's a solid defense. And then more latterly, maybe you think, Sam Surridge gets a few goals. But they've invested in some quality in midfield. And that's where perhaps you'll see a little bit of a difference in the style, the way that they play. Eddie Tagseth, a Norwegian player from Rosenborg, has come across. He's been an instant hit. He not only covers a lot of ground, he's got a really special football IQ. His relationship with Mukhtar is already showing. Ahmed Kassim didn't play at the weekend in the victory here over Montreal because he was ill on the day of the game, but he would have started. He got 2 goals in as many starts so far, and he looks a real quality player, a very determined player. When we spoke to him last week, it was very clear to him MLS and Nashville is a stopping point and a staging post in a career that he feels the next stage will be moving into a top 5 European league, having been playing in Sweden. And then they've got Gaston Brugman, who was the MLS Cup MVP in November or December even, and he's now part of this Nashville group. So he provides that experience and quality on the ball. So they're a team right now that's looking pretty good, and they're starting to do some of the things that BJ Callahan wanted them to do. And so they've rebounded very well from last season. And this will be a tough challenge. I'm sure it'll be drilled into them, the newer players from the older players, what an important game this is against Cincinnati.
Yeah, I agree with you. Tagseth is the one for me. We've seen it with LaRaz in Colorado, or like Ashley Westwood in Charlotte, guys that can be in the middle of the park that can not only do some defensive work, but show that IQ to really move the ball between the lines. And Tagseth has really impressed me. But before we all start panicking about the game on the weekend for FC Cincinnati, I want to try to get to a bigger picture and ask you, what are you seeing on the horizon, like for you this weekend or in the weeks to come, like matchups, maybe that you're particularly looking forward to researching or calling, or maybe even just taking in on television?
Yeah, I always kind of keep an eye on particularly closely on obviously what's coming up on my schedule in terms of teams I'm going to see. And in the next few weeks, I will see Charlotte. I will see Toronto a couple of times, having seen them once already this season. I think it's going to be a tough year for them. And I'm also going to see San Diego. And I'm going to see Chicago, and I think Chicago an interesting, story there with the changes that have been brought in, and there's a lot more expectation. Now, some of those teams, I certainly know in the case of Chicago, they're on the schedule for Cincinnati. And actually, if we look back quickly to what you were talking about, the kind of what the fans' opinion is of the season, no easy games in MLS, but I do think the Cincy MLS schedule coming up beyond Nashville isn't the toughest. It's New England at home, DC United away, Chicago away, Sporting Kansas City home. So, I think by the time you've gone through those games, there should be plenty of room for plenty of optimism. But just to go back to Charlotte, for example, I've seen what Dean Smith did there last year, instituted a much more organized style. It was very pleasing on the eye to watch them under Christian Latanzio, but ultimately they gave away a lot of goals and they weren't achieving too much. Dean Smith has changed all that. They've also invested in quality. They're another one of these clubs, it's new age MLS. It's investing in quality in the transfer market. And from my time back in England, I'm a huge Wilfried Zaha fan. I covered many games where for Crystal Palace, he literally put that team on his back and got them across the line. He won them games on his own. He's a wonderful talent. And I don't want to kind of, put the fates on him here because I don't want to get the prediction wrong. But I said when he arrived in MLS, I think he had every chance of being a total MLS star because he's got the charisma, the style, everything I think that would be popular in this league. And the early signs are quite encouraging for him on that. I mean, Atlanta, by the way, they got the draw with Cincinnati on Saturday. They haven't quite hit the ground running the way I thought they might. So they got a little bit of work to do. And then there's Miami, who are still kind of operate in their own kind of world a little bit. But tremendously good to watch.
Which speaks to a lot of parity in the Eastern Conference. I mean, I'm looking at aside from the bottom three, which all have a point, you've got 5 and 10 points separating the top and the bottom. Tony, I'm curious. The one thing that stands out to me is that Philadelphia is on top, and it was astonishing to me that Jim Curtin was let go, because they had such a success with him, and yet Bradley Carnell and I guess openly. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, did St. Louis make a mistake letting this guy go?
Good question. I mean, what happened in St. Louis last year was probably one of the most surprising things to me. I followed them. I was on a lot of their games in the first season, saw how well they did. You knew that ultimately perhaps it's going to be difficult to sustain quite the form that they had in year one. I don't think anybody could have predicted the year two kind of tear down of the roster, players leaving left, right, and center, and then Bradley goes. I don't, obviously, clearly, we won't know exactly what the behind the scenes story there was, but clearly all was not well. In fact, if you watch Onside, which is streaming obviously on Apple TV Plus at the moment.
Nicely done, sir.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I hope they're listening. But you will see a little bit of a lifting of the lid or a pulling back of the curtain. You could see that things were not quite right there, but my goodness, how it changed. And so I think you've got a very hungry head coach in Bradley Carnell, who's gone to Philly, and maybe Philly, it was just ready for a new era. And I was surprised that Jim Curtin left, but ultimately, there comes a moment at a club, and these days, to stay as long as he had was a remarkable effort. But Bradley Carnell's coming there. I'm not totally surprised he's coming and given a bit of just an infusion. He's a coach he has that bit of a chip on his shoulder. He's a grinder. He's real. He wants his teams to be aggressive. He's thoroughly good to deal with. And so we'll see how this can be sustained at Philly, because they're not traditionally big spenders, and they're still working off a lot of the roster from last year, and they've lost a few bits as well. But it's been a very good start for them.
Yeah. Tony, it's been great to have you. I've got one more question before we get you out of here. There's a few of us from Cincinnati Soccer Talk that are coming down to Nashville for the match, myself included. So it'll be my first time in Nashville for a game. Been to the city, enjoy the city. Never been to Geodis Park there for a match. I know we've got fans from Cincinnati coming down that love to travel to be there at the park for the game. For those of us, it's our first time. What's something that you would say we need to take in while we're there in the city, whether it's pre-match or just after the game or just while we're in the city in general? What's something that we need to take in there in Nashville?
Well, Geodis Park is kind of a mile and a half south of kind of downtown Nashville. So I would suggest get here early enough to get yourself up into town. Broadway is an obvious attraction just to experience it. The numbers of people there are already starting to get very busy at weekends. It's a great atmosphere though down there, and great for visitors. So I would suggest heading there. You've got to have some Nashville hot chicken, surely. I mean, it was made very clear to me when I came over to Tennessee. You've got to be a great fan of hot chicken. Prince's hot chicken is very good. Hattie B's is a kind of market leader, it seems, when it comes to hot chicken around here. If you want to avoid the lines, Prince's can be a bit quieter in the Assembly Food Hall right on Broadway. So I would suggest you enjoy that. And if you want to see a bit of culture, obviously there's the Parthenon, which is down on West End Avenue in Centennial Park in Nashville, and that is an absolute replica of the Greek Parthenon, in what they call the Athens of the South. So you can enjoy all that. But I know as well what an important game this. I mean, the Nashville fans, they see Cincinnati as the game. I mean, the rivalry is there with Atlanta. To a degree with Charlotte, but Cincinnati's the game for most of the longer term fans, and they still regale me with the stories of Tucker Hume and Big Bird celebrations and all those things. So this is a really great game, and it'd be great to see lots of traveling fans as well. Lots of orange in the stadium to go up against the gold as well. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. I was sitting in the Bailey for the first time last year when Nashville beat Cincinnati 2-0 at home, and so I'm looking for a better outcome in Nashville this weekend. Tony, thanks again for joining us. It's been great to have you. Looking forward to the broadcast this week, and best of luck the rest of the season.
Thank you very much to all of you.
Thanks, Tony.
Good luck to Cincinnati as well for the rest of the season. I'm sure it's going to be a pretty decent one.
Let's hope so. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
All right, guys. What a good interview. It's good. Always
cool.
good to have the MLS Season Pass folks join us for a segment, and a guy that's so familiar with Nashville, with our coming opponent. It's good to have him. So grateful for that. We want to thank our second half show sponsor, Beyond Exercise. It's a local physical therapy and fitness business that helps people stay active and injury free. In fact, they help some of our local MLS Next, and FCC Academy players with their health and performance needs. Check out their suite of services at Go Beyond Exercise. All right, gentlemen, I want to cycle back a little bit. We've talked a little bit about Nashville so far tonight, and I want to cycle back to the match that we just played against Atlanta. And I want to move into a bit of our talking tactics segment. And Coach, one of the things that, the back line, we talked about people being all out of sorts, all out of different positions, whatever. One of the things we've harped on for weeks has been the lack of attack coming from our wing backs. It doesn't seem to be much of a threat, especially with new wing backs playing in different positions and not the support on the inside of them, on their right or their left that they're used to. Talk a little bit about the wing back play and what we saw as it translated into attack up the field, either first half, second half.
Yeah, so I talked about last week how Pat Noonan had to find a way to get Evander on the ball in dangerous situations. So we talk about this area just outside of the top of the 18. We call it Zone 14. I won't bore you with the reason why, but Zone 14 is key to talking about a dangerous area to have the ball in, right? The way FCC plays is by advancing the ball into the attacking third in the wide areas with those wing backs. They receive the majority of the progressive passes. Even if there's a player like Evander or like Lucho last year who would receive more, the wing backs as a pair receive the most, pretty much by far. If you're not going to play with high chance creation wingers, which FC Cincinnati is not, then you have to find a way to get the ball to a central playmaker from those wide areas. Now, when they had Lucho Acosta, he would just float out there by himself, right? He would get on the ball from wide and then either dribble to the middle, beating players, or maybe look for like a 1-2 combination or combine. And we always talked about getting him running with the ball at Zone 14 or through Zone 14. Evander kind of wants to more hang out and look for those little pockets of space in and around Zone 14 and wait for the ball to come to him. Or when he does float wide, he's looking to like get on the ball, hit a dangerous pass from there to someone else, or pull the ball back and then move again. So the wing backs really are going to have to be key in terms of how Evander plays. And Evander is the guy who's going to stir the drink, right? He is the guy who's going to make things tick. Well, in the first half, he only had 4 touches that I would say were like solidly in the attacking third. There were another 8 that might have been like on the edge of it. But even if you put that at 11, only 3 of those touches were anywhere near Zone 14, right? You have Kubo playing on the left as a right footer and DeAndre Yedlin playing on the right in those wing back positions. And they could not get the ball to Evander. Every time Yedlin got the ball, it seemed like he would step on it and then play negative. He'd pass it backwards, was really reluctant to try to push anything into the middle or do anything dangerous with the ball. He had 11 passes in the attacking half of the field in the first half when he was playing as a right wing back. 7 of those were backwards. 4 of them were forward, but guess what? Only 1 of those forward passes was completed. So he completed 1 forward pass in the attacking half of the field. And then Kubo didn't get a lot of touches out there in wide attacking areas because, like Orishano, he loves to come into those half spaces and he's picking the ball up more like where you'd want Evander to be getting on it anyway. Now, the second half changed things. Evander had somewhere north of 23 touches in the attacking third, and 20 of those 23 were in that dangerous area,
so maybe
kind of in or near.
In the locker room.
Maybe, but what was the major difference? If you take out some inspirational words by Pat Noonan, what was the major difference? Corey Baird coming in on the right in place of Yedlin. Now,
you guys know how I feel about Baird. Baird is my progressive guy. He made some really good runs. I like watching Baird. I think he gets a lot of heat, but he really facilitates plays, and I think that's why he gets a lot of flack, is he's not the guy that's going to shoot that long distance ball. He's really facilitating the offense. But yeah, you're right, Coach. He came in and really made a difference.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing was, though, exactly what you're talking about. And we talked about this and on one of the episodes preseason, that the one thing Baird can do is set others up to score, right? But you need to have somebody out there that can do that. We talked about Yedlin's numbers. By contrast, Baird had 18 passes in the attacking half. Only 5 of them were backwards. Everything else was forward or square towards the middle. And he didn't complete 2 of those. So he completed way more passes and more of them were forward. So if you're going to insist on starting your attack from those wide areas, you either have to get guys like Orishano or Evander or Kubo to get on the ball out wide and then combine to the inside like Lucho used to do, or you have to get wing backs that are not so risk averse. And I don't think Corey Baird's the answer. Atlanta didn't challenge him defensively. We've seen Kubo struggle defensively. Not that they're not working hard. They don't have the game sense to just all of a sudden play a different position. But I worry deeply about having DeAndre Yedlin as the day in, day out starter over there and what that means for our offense and how it grinds to a halt every time the ball touches his foot on that side of the field.
Yeah, Coach, I want to bring up a question from Rupesh in the chat. He's asking him, "Am I smoking crack?" And I just want to let him know it's just a little wine. He was on an open run and then just stopped, and I feel like that was that is the Baird thing. It's like I'm out there on the field, I'm trying to contribute positively, and I have this energy to contribute positively. When I get to the moment where I need to do so. What am I supposed to do now? I do feel that a lot with Baird. He gets to the end of his runs and doesn't know or doesn't have an option. And you're speaking about the Yedlins moving backwards. A lot of the negativity play or the negative ball movement. Do you think that's Noonan or do you think that's the player?
Yeah, I think that this idea of Baird stopping his run before he gets to the end line, I'm guessing that's Noonan, because you see Yedlin do that as well, and they're 2 very different players. You see Engel do that on the left as well. I think Noonan wants to stop that ball before you get in deeper than the top of the 18, because once you get into there, unless you can get inside the 18 and look for cutbacks, crosses from those areas are really low percentage chances. So I actually like that coaching, although, especially the chance that we were talking about with Baird, where he was on his open run. There are times when you need to get to that cutback zone and create a dangerous chance. So there's got to be a balance. In terms of passing negative, though, I think that is what the player does when Noonan says, okay, let's advance the ball up to these areas and the wide areas, step on it, and then look to bring our playmakers in. For Yedlin, that means, if I pass it to Evander, he might lose it. If I pass it to Denke, or in this case, Santos, he might lose it. So I'm going to pull it backwards to Buka. He's a safe pair of feet to put the ball to. That's what Yedlin does. I don't know if Yedlin doesn't want to turn the ball over and then have to sprint back. Not saying whether he's lazy or not, just he's saying, I don't want to turn the ball over. I'm already up here. But Baird doesn't have that problem. He's like, I'm going to try this pass. I'll flick it into the middle here and I'll make a run. And we saw it worked more often than it didn't. And when it doesn't, you usually have the ball in an area where you can counter press and try to win it back, which, by the way, both of FC Cincinnati's goals, the free kick opportunity and then the goal itself, came from counter-pressing opportunities. They weren't even times when we got the ball set up and then created from there.
Yeah, Coach, I want to talk about maybe what we saw at the top of the box. Obviously, Kevin Denke, special type of player. You don't have him this week. You go to Sergio Santos starting up top again. Very different styles of play between those two. And I'm wondering, this has been a point that's been brought up by a lot of FCC fans, some in the chat, some just commenting on CST. If that's the case, number one, how much does that switch between Denke and Santos change the complexion of the FCC attack? And if you're Pat Noonan, is that a case in which you look and say, Santos can't do what Denke does, we have to have a different strategy for that attack?
Yeah, I think that's been one of my biggest frustrations. And I saw some of it in the chat too, early on in the best and worst. People are feeling that. You are dead on that Santos and Denke not only are not the same player, but they cannot do the same things. So what you end up having is you have a guy in Santos who is not as clean on the ball. You can't put the ball into his feet unless when he flops to the ground, they call a foul, which he seemed to try an awful lot on Saturday. unless that happens, there's not a lot that's going to happen. You can get the ball to him in open space, though, and he's pretty darn good at times, right? With his speed, with his power. But Noonan refuses to change. And instead he says, okay, like this is how our offense works, whether we have Santos, whether we have Denke, whether we have Kubo playing as the 9, this is how we're going to play. And it's not a good strategy. I get the idea. The idea as a coach is you want to have a style of play that fits. And whether the players change or not, the style is generally the same. I don't know if the players are not getting the message that the style can be similar without asking guys to do the exact same thing, or whether Noonan is not giving the guys enough leeway within the system to do that. Like we talked about Baird stopping his open run, and we don't know for sure it's Noonan telling him to do that. But what can Santos do? He can run in behind. If I'm coaching Santos, anytime I put him on the field, whether it's as a sub or as a starter, I'm saying you look to get in behind over and over and over. I don't care if it's from the 18 to the 6, the little acceleration in behind. I don't care
because he has the legs to do that.
Exactly. Right? In behind. Make those center backs so worried that you're going to get on the ball in behind that they play sideways on, which means standing sideways to the field instead of square to the ball, and are always first taking that first step back. That's going to allow Evander to have a moment like he did. What happened on Evander's free kick opportunity was, and actually it was on his goal. Evander got the ball. Kubo ran like heck basically towards the goal. He was never getting the ball there, but the defenders dropped, which gave Evander a half a yard of space, and that's all Evander needs there. Whereas Santos was so often trying to sit there and ask for the ball at his feet, and then when he gets it, that's not even his game. So whether that is Santos trying to be like, I'm going to do my best Kevin Denke impersonation, or whether that's Pat Noonan saying, we need you to do your best Kevin Denke impersonation, I don't know, but it is driving me crazy that FCC seems to try to play the same way every time, no matter who's out there.
Yeah. It's that speed for Sergio Santos. That's his strength. And I'm going to shout out my fellow season ticket holder, my good buddy Matt Ivory, who every time Santos does something not great, will just shout, "You're good at being fast. Just be fast."
Yeah.
Love it.
And I don't want to take us offline, and I don't want to take us off track, but I do sense like with post conferences, there's a listlessness about Pat Noonan, right? Like if you watch the post conferences, just watch the attitude. There's a listlessness. It's like he's been through the gauntlet. It's like we did the CONCACAF and we did these things, and now the national call-ups, and we've had players coming on drama. I sense his cup hath runneth full. and I think that's a possibility as to why some decisions are being made. I'm wondering, when coach talks like that, like if he's looking at the way we look to play as the constant, he's looking for a constant. And I agree that Denke's not Santos. And maybe that's why he's making those choices.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think there's a lot that has been happening that Pat Noonan is just trying to figure out with this roster, with this team, and where the partnerships are. One of the things I said I wanted to talk briefly about Orishano. Again, we don't need to, I just want to mention it. We don't need to chat too much about it. The partnerships with he and Evander, I would love to see develop a little bit more. I did see Evander do some Lucho-esque things this match that I haven't seen before, at least as far as getting into tight spaces and being able to dribble into the top of the box with 3 defenders surrounding him and looking to dish the ball off or take a shot when he has an opportunity. So there is that. Orishano, the other thing I was gonna say about him is at times he looks like he's making the run, he beats a defender, he cuts to the middle, and then he's unsure about his next move. Like he's not sure, where's Lucho, where's Denke, where's the guy I'm supposed to pass to, and he kind of looks a little bit lost in there. And so maybe that'll come along in that partnership with he and Evander. I'd love to see develop in the next couple matches here as we get to into April and the spring part of the season. Guys, we've talked surprisingly a lot about the offensive third of this game, but the players we were missing were all in the back, right? We had Nick Hagglund. We had, his first game back. We had, Miazga's still out. Flores out on suspension. We had a couple injuries. We had some international, we were just missing a lot of guys on that back line. And my question is there, we've talked about this issue of depth on this team. I remember several of us in our first couple episodes saying, this is the deepest this roster has ever been, right? And yet we roll out a squad with 5 backs that are not playing. None of them are playing their natural position. Is this a testament to the depth of this team that we can roll out 5 guys and trust them back there? Or is this exposing a lack of depth that we've got to grab guys and just throw them in there somewhere? Where are you at on this, Nick?
Well, let's put this in perspective. If you made a depth chart of center backs for FCC, the 4 guys that you would have at the top of the depth chart were all out for this game. I don't think there's a lot of teams that would survive.
I was next, actually. I was the next CB. I was there because they were going to ask me to play. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't think this past game is a damnation of depth. In fact, I think the fact that you're able to kind of take all these pieces and put them together to make this makeshift back line, who played overall pretty well. Some issues, but overall pretty bad, pretty well, and be able to go out and get a point over a pretty good Atlanta United team. I do think that it says something about the pieces that FCC has. Now, I know I agree with everybody. It would be great if we had, a traditional center back, maybe an FCC2 that you could call up to kind of be the emergency depth. It'd be great if you could kind of get people playing in consistent positions with consistent people, but at the very least, you have good soccer players that you can plug in to a role and say, look, this isn't your natural position. We know that, but we're asking you to do this for 1, maybe 2 games. I think the fact that Pat Noonan is able to do that, and the fact that this team is good enough to be able to do that, I do think that says something about an emergency situation like we saw this past Saturday.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing you have to understand, no team in MLS has the depth to cover 4 starting center backs or 4 center backs being out. And the reason why that depth is so strong, what we talked about, is you have guys like Powell and Yedlin and Engel that can play as either an outside back, a wing back, or an outside center back. I think the bigger issue is, one, what we talked about with the unwillingness to play differently, right? If you don't have your center backs, can you sit a bit deeper and play more on the counterattack? Why do you have to still try to possess out of the back and not just literally get the ball launched and go try to win a second ball? You have a bunch of outside players playing in the middle, and Nick Hagglund, the only center back, is one of the weakest passing center backs there is on the team. Nothing against him. It's just not his game. He's an all effort, go win a challenge, go win a header kind of guy. And you have him playing in the center as that metronome pivot point, right? Why not then play a bit differently and play a little more direct? And the reluctance to do that, whether it's by the players or by Pat Noonan, I think cost the team more than the actual depth.
Yeah, we've got a couple of comments in the chat. It's really interesting to me because Jose, I'll put that back up here. Jose says the depth issues to me are still the wing backs for the duration of the season. John Dench just chimed in. If Buka or Obi go down, who's filling in? So
that's me.
So we've talked a lot about the lack of depth, at least on that left wing back position. And, we're seeing it now with the right wing back position as potential lack of depth issues there. Many of us were in agreement that those were the positions. Is that still the case? Or are we seeing maybe we need more in the central midfield at this point as well?
I think it's still the wingbacks is the weakest position. You hit on it even on the right. It's you have guys that can come in now, but do the exact same thing the other guys do. Powell's a little bit of a wild card out there because he thinks he can just dribble through anybody. And if you haven't read Nate Gilman's preseason streams, or if you're not a subscriber over there on Substack, you should go do that because he has a little blurb at the end where he talks about Powell is just fun to watch. Even though it's dangerous, he's going to try something.
Amen.
But Brad Smith, Smith is just like an older version of Lucas Engel out there. I mean, he does the same things. He's not particularly slow, but he's not particularly fast. He's pretty good on the ball, not really dangerous, whipping balls in behind the back line, but he can do a job and help combine or play to the middle. You know, it's like there's nothing out there that's different. You can't change.
I mean, not to debate you at the nth hour, Coach, but I mean, do we know that from Brad Smith now? Do we? He's just come on. He's been out a while, and I saw one of the balls that sailed over the cross. Do we really know Brad Smith and what he is right now in this moment from this one game?
I mean, the answer is we have a pretty good career of him, even in MLS, which tells him when he was younger and playing with Seattle, he was much more of like the quicker, like get to the end line sort of a guy. But I think for the past 3 or 4 years, you can go back and look, and I think that is the guy he is. Like he's going to be a decent depth piece, but I don't think he adds something different than Engel. He might be able to do it a bit better, which would be helpful. But I'm not sure. I don't think that it's different.
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between depth and the right depth. Like you can have 4 forwards, 4 strikers on the roster. Are all of them going to provide you with the same level of play Denke does in the same style? I do see that.
Is that a rhetorical question, or is that like based on something you've seen on the field here?
Hot take, if true. But I do see the wingbacks, and as I looked this up to who said it, it's John in our chat. That said, you know, what happens if Obi or Buka go down? That to me is kind of the big question mark right now. Obviously, I think you have Brian Anuga, who's able to have some really good minutes sort of in that deep central spot, but who's the guy that's going to step in and kind of push that play out from that, you know, 6 or 8 spot in that midfield?
Well, we know that answer is probably an FC2 guy, right? We're going to call somebody up.
Or Yuya Kubo in one of the 8 positions.
The Davy Concepcion of FC Cincinnati. Yes, he's only not played goalie at this point, and I swear if they don't put him in the goalie at some point,
if there's ever a chance for him to play center back, it was this past game. But to that point, Kubo came in and replaced Buka in that second Tigres game, and you know that structure kind of fell apart. Just because you're a good player doesn't necessarily mean you fit every single spot on that pitch. Kind of counter to what I just said about that back line, but we're going to forget about that part for a second. I do think center mid is a point in which you have to look at, along with wingback. And I still maintain what I said a couple of weeks ago. If there is another U22 striker out there that plays sort of that similar target man style that Kevin Denke has, even if he's not everything he's going to be right now, I would say you have for look at it.
Did you say Kevin Kelsey?
Kevin Kelsey. I was all in on keeping Kevin Kelsey. Not for the price tag that he wound up getting, but I was a big fan of Kevin Kelsey now, being a year or 2 away from being something big in MLS.
Yeah.
Right. So that was my theory, is that I felt like this last game, it was good actually to have Denke gone so that Evander, sorry, I keep wanting to say Evander, but Evander could be a focal point. I feel like when you're, and I take this to my own learnings from chess, when you're trying to learn chess, you don't learn, you know, pawn breaks and the bird and the Sicilian and all those things at once. You learn them one at a time and you develop them. And I feel like Noonan has just been presented with so many weapons that how do you, in the tumult of the beginning of the season, kind of unravel what each player can really do to their potential with all of them on at once? And that's my question to the group, is like, how, I would be overwhelmed. I would be overwhelmed with that kind of star power. That's like having Madonna and Janet Jackson and Christina Aguilera. Did I just go like chick singers? What did I just do?
Just aged our show, is what you did.
That's what I just did. It's like having all that firepower up front. How do you unravel what they're all good at?
But Cliff, your analogy, to put your analogy back into play here, that'd be like saying like, oh, we're going to take all of your pieces except your pawns, and that's how you're going to learn to play chess. You're just going to learn to play with your pawns, or your pawns and bishops, right? Because without having Evander or without having Denke on the field, it's like you're having a big missing piece. You're playing with only one rook or only one bishop, or you know, without your queen. I don't know, whatever the analogy is. The point is, you can learn always. You can learn these attacking sequences, but you have to have all your pieces in play to do it. So I think it's less about one piece being gone or not gone, and more about when those pieces change, instead of trying to make the same thing and try to say, and I'm still going to try to play the exact same way, even though all I have is pawns out here. You got to be different. You got to change what you're doing.
Yeah. I think to your point earlier about your worst being Orishano not stepping up and being that guy, this may have been in the second half an opportunity for Evander to step up and say, all right, we're missing some pieces that I would love to play with and love to be out on the field with me, but somebody's got to step up and do something. And I guess it may as well be me. Right. And so it may have just provided an opportunity for him to step up and shine. I'd love to see him on the field with Denke here this next weekend and see how the two of them continue to develop that partnership and the trio with Orishano as well. Guys, this is what you get. This is bonus CST content after 10. How about that? This is what you get. We're going to move on. There's a couple things we want to touch on. The FCC2. Well, first of all, let me just say this. There's been some great questions in the chat that we've not been able to get to and address tonight. Could be good opportunities for Coach for potential talking tactics video segments that I know you did a couple of, and maybe there's things that will continue to be issues that we need to address in future shows. So keep the questions coming. We may not be able to hit them all tonight, but we'd love the interaction and love the questions, and we'd love to get back to them. We just want to talk for a moment FCC2. You know, the team that is trying to develop players for our first team, the team that has sent Noah Adnan up for some significant minutes early in the season. Stefan Chirilla has played a few minutes for the first team. Amir Daly has played some minutes for the first team. We're seeing some guys develop at the FCC2 level, and it's a shame that they were knocked out in the early round of the U.S. Open Cup. If you missed that game, they dominated possession. It was 68 to 32% possession versus New York Penn Cyprian, and in the end, it ended in a draw, went to PKs, and there's a young man. I think he said he was an academy player, 16 years old. I didn't catch that, but as he steps up, it was his first. I thought it was first PK, first time on the field for FCC2, but I was corrected, Coach, right? That was his first professional penalty kick. And unfortunately didn't go in, left FCC2 with the loss in PKs in their first match of the U.S. Open Cup. So, but they were missing Stefan Chirilla, and that's one thing I just wanted to ask real quick. He was away on international duty for Romania's U18s. Coach, I was going to ask you this last week. We didn't get a chance to get to it, and we're running short on time here, but how important are those opportunities for a young player like Stefan Chirilla, who's not even playing significant minutes yet with the senior squad in Cincinnati, but he's getting an opportunity to play these international matches? How important is that for a young developing player?
It's incredibly important, even invaluable, in the fact that these guys get to be experiencing different things and put into different environments, experiencing different pressures, playing with players that have different skill sets. It just helps you to develop as a player. We saw it with these academy kids playing against Pan Cyprian, these grizzled veterans that were, doing things like time wasting from the 40th minute and playing bunkered and trying to figure out how to break that down. It's just a really good way to develop as a professional. If you just go play against the same guys you play against all the time, or the same type of guy, right? All the same other MLS Next Pro guys trying to do the same thing. I'm not saying you can't develop that way, but it's just so invaluable to have those other experiences.
And I think that's one of the reasons I'm most sad that they didn't win that first match. The competition and the different styles and the different clubs they could have faced moving forward, I think was the thing that I was most excited to see in them. Nick?
Yeah, I was just going to add, in taking this back to my hockey roots for a second, but you always kind of look at.
Well, it was that cold, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, you always take it back to the AHL, who are the minor league, and you look at the champions there, and you look at some of the guys that have stepped up. More than likely or not, those are the guys that are coming in 3-4 years later and scoring big goals in the playoffs for their team. They might not be the number one guy, but they're out there with experience, and they don't shy away from the bright lights or experience. And to me, that is such a big thing for players, especially some of these, U18 players or, 18, 19-year-old players, is they're getting a chance to go out there and play in a win or go home tournament, representing your organization.
Yeah,
that's
they're
high
definitely
stakes,
developing
and
some hair
I
on
do
their chest.
do what?
They're developing some hair on their chest. Definitely.
Exactly. But this is the kind of thing that you would want to go out there and have them sort of have this experience of a little bit of pressure, not an immense amount of pressure, but some decent pressure because, God willing, 3-4 of these guys wind up becoming pretty solid players for FCC. That's the goal of any sort of academy, or at least I think the way that, the MLS 2 is structured. They're going to be able to step up in a couple of years and sort of be able to know how to play under high intense playoff situations because they've had good experience carrying a team in this tournament.
Hold up, Nick. Matt Silver in the chat there. I've never seen an FCC2 game. Is it worth the trip from Dayton? Matt, if you friend me right now and you DM me and you pick a game you want to go to, we will go together. Tickets and drinks on me. Because honestly, I don't have a good excuse to get out there, and I don't have permission from the missus, but you would be enough. Like if I said, this guy, Matt, is coming from Dayton and he wants to go see an FCC2 game, that would be enough to make the difference. So DM me, slide into my DMs, and let's get to an FCC2 game. Because that's the thing. Jose, our own Jose and Justin were out there, right? And it was a really windy, cold day. That's what I saw going on. And I saw a lot of really good athleticism, but I saw the same kind of frustration about trying to build an offensive schema around that team, and it was kind of scary. And it doesn't help that the team was named something that has multiple syllables and rhymes with fancy free. So I have had an issue with that, but it was a really good game to watch, and I definitely want to get out there and see them more.
You are enough. That's the most significant thing Matt has heard all day today. You are enough.
You are enough.
You remember that, Matt, and it looks like he's going to take you up on that offer.
Good.
guys,
Anybody named Silver is worth something.
Yeah.
We do have a match coming up this weekend against Nashville. We touched on that with Tony earlier in the show, so we don't need to dive too deep into that. I'm excited about being there in Geodis Park for the first time for the FC Cincinnati Nashville matchup. I want to move quickly into our final thoughts because we're like way over time, guys. So I want to, Nick, I want to start with you. Give us your final thought.
Coach hit on something earlier in the show, and it's about this team culture. You heard about, Alvis Powell giving up that own goal immediately, consoled by Nick Hagglund in the locker room. You saw Roman Celentano run over there and just pat him on the back. Why is culture so important in soccer? Look at what's happening with the U.S. men's national team right now. That is an absolutely broken culture from the top down. The players are, complacent and apathy. They don't want to play for each other. There's just a lot of stuff going on. That's culture. There is a culture problem there. When you have a team like FCC where the players legitimately love playing with each other and for each other, that's a big boost in tactical problems, communication problems. That's stuff that you can be fixed when you have trust with your teammates, when you have a good core in the locker room. That's something that can easily be fixed. You can't fix people not wanting to play with each other or not caring about the result on the pitch as much as your paycheck. And for me, I think that is important to point out where FCC's culture is right now, and players stepping up for each other, having each other's back. You see all these practice videos and Instagram stuff from the team. The players are having a blast going out there, practicing, competing against each other. That's huge. And that to me is a sign that for all the faults that are going on the field right now for FCC, they're on the right track and they're going to be okay.
Yeah, good shout there. Cliff, how about your final thought?
I think the Nashville game is going to be a challenge. But I just want to say, and this is going to be a completely different take, but what I bring to the game when I go and see a game, and when I go and I sit with my wife and my family, I think is something that we're not.
Or Matt Silver.
What?
Or Matt Silver.
Or Matt Silver, or whoever's like sliding into my DMs. But so my wife has been away for 2 months. She is getting on a plane in 1 hour in Peru to come back. She's on an emergency passport because we sent her out there with a good Peruvian, but an expired United States. She has a license and is a citizen. So she's flying back into Atlanta. So what I bring to the game when I sit there in the stadium is the hope that tomorrow my wife arrives and the international flavor that this game brings to our community. And I'm grateful for any moment where that is happening in the Cincinnati area. I mean, I've been around here for 51 years, so I'm looking forward to that. But in terms of Nashville, my uncle is there right now with a double lung transplant at Vanderbilt University, and he's blown up like a balloon. And so my shout out to Pat Preziosi, recovering from that. So that's what I bring to the game, gentlemen, and each and every night. So there's a lot there, and I'm sorry I've unpacked that here. But the one thing I want to say is I'm grateful for this family. I'm not just you guys, the three on the screen, but everybody in the chat, everybody in the FC Cincinnati fan group, everybody that shows up to the stadium. And when we get the wonderful chance to announce that 25531 or 513 showed up, it's wonderful. I could have used, as most of you could have, 5 or 10 more degrees on Saturday. If there was any chance of me procreating again, it's gone because it was way too cold. But I am always thankful for these moments with you and for these moments with this team. I was super excited to see Tony Husband tonight come in, and how grateful are we to get that insight in that, you know, this dude was a cricket guy to come in and talk to us from Apple. So I was grateful, and thank you so much for allowing me into your presence tonight. Thank you so much.
Yeah, glad to have you. It's been deep thoughts with Clifford Adams. Thank you.
Definitely deep.
Coach, how about your final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks for having me follow that. I don't got anything like that. So I think the biggest thing that I want to say is that I don't think this is going to get better before it gets worse. And here's why. This team is still not getting full weeks of training together. Like Kevin Denke is still not back or is just getting back to Cincinnati. You know, this is still not a normal start to the season, but the MLS season is so long. So don't be like our internal Cincinnati Soccer Talk chat, and every time a goal gives up, start being like, Pat Noonan, his seat's going to start getting warm. Got to start questioning Chris Albright. I'm not saying he should be fired, but he's, let's not lose our minds, because probably FC Cincinnati is probably going to lose if they're lucky draw, and they might win on Saturday. But this takes time to put these pieces and get them working together. And if you don't trust a coach who led a historically terrible team to a respectful finish, then the Supporters Shield, and then a better than respectful finish, to get it turned around right. Does that mean that we're going to win the cup? No. Are we going to win the Supporters Shield? Almost certainly no. But it does not mean the season is going to be a disaster, and they certainly will have every opportunity to win the cup come the end of the year. After all, the New York freaking Red Bulls made it to the final last year. So FC Cincinnati, I think, can certainly have as good a shot as anyone. So don't lose your minds. Have fun. This is supposed to be fun, guys.
Good point, Coach. We have enough spoons from FC Cincinnati fandom. We have enough spoons to toss a good salad, but I think patience is a virtue here.
Yeah. No, I just want to echo a couple of those final thoughts. And my final thought is, I said early on in the season that I think it's going to take time for this team to gel. It's going to take time for the pieces to come together to develop the partnerships. And we certainly won't see them win the Shield this year because of a slow start. It is painful to watch. It is hard to see when those partnerships aren't developing as quickly as you had hoped, even though you were realistic maybe at the beginning to think they weren't going to. It's still hard to watch. So I'm still optimistic. I want to echo your thought too. Is one of the other things, Nick, that I was going to say is, as culture comes together, as we get leadership back in the locker room, like Nick Hagglund and his conversation we mentioned several times with Alvis Powell after the game, we get leadership back from Matt Miazga whenever he gets back in the locker room. We get guys like Evander feeling a little bit more confident, working the way into the leadership of the team, but leadership on the field, moving the ball a little bit smoother with guys that he's trusting more in the locker room. Culture's coming together. Teamwork will come together. Those partnerships will develop. And I think, at the end of April, beginning of May, we're going to see a different Cincinnati performance than we've seen so far this season. So stick with it. Stay patient. It's going to take some time. This team's going to be outstanding. Thanks for joining us here at Cincinnati Soccer Talk. We will see you next week.
Huzzah.